Hello, and welcome to another edition of Storytime with Scott Boss. Today we are reading the Graveyard Gazette, Chapter 12. The group agreed to meet up again the next morning, but earlier that time. It was their weekend, but 5 a.m., their agreed time to meet, wouldn't be odd hours for any of them. It would just be like the end of a shift. They'd questioned Carrie on the other idea he had, but he got them to agree to that meeting earlier and would solve the problem. He wasn't ready to mention Angela yet. After their trip to the cafe, when his co-workers were out of his car, he dialed Angela's number and got a generic voicemail that repeated back the number, along with a notice that she was not available. Carrie stared at the gates to the graveyard as his friends drove off one at a time. Behind them, the lone building stood quiet in the morning sun. He'd never seen anyone come in or out of there, though it had to be open at some point. How would people visit their loved ones? He drove home. His smoking habit had been dropped as fast as he picked it back up. Initially, he thought it was just the cost, but in the past few days, his desire for a cigarette just wasn't there. Like when you get sick on some bad tacos and a month later you still know you like tacos, but you can't bring yourself to eat one. He decided he'd trash the half pack he had left when he got home, only he found himself tucking them in his medicine cabinet next to the pain pills. They just felt like they belonged there. After some sleep, Carrie finally started in the laundry room on the laundry and dishes. They both were well overdue and took most of his afternoon. He microwaved himself a burrito just in time for the evening news. He'd never been one to keep up with the fear-mongering news shows until recently. Now he had to see what they were saying. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until it stared him in the face. Police were waiting for an armed robber tonight in a local convenience store after an anonymous tip from a Good Samaritan. More after the break. It has to be, Carrie thought. He waited with eyes peeled through 3 minutes worth of advertisements for Bojangles fried chicken sandwiches, a Mitsubishi dealership offering great low rates on new and used Outlanders, and of course, more drug ads with names that sounded like a word jumble of other drugs. Lexoprinosinefosol, or something Carrie couldn't pronounce. Finally, the Channel 6 news logo came back on with music and sound effects that let you know you were about to hear the latest report before any other station could even dream of it. It cut to a reporter holding a microphone outside of a gas station. This is the scene where local law enforcement arrived, much to the owner's surprise tonight. James Westford, owner and operator of the Triangle Stop near Highway 74, was stocking his cigarette cabinet when Officer Grady of the Bremerton Police Department walked through the door. He'd received an anonymous call stating an armed robber was on his way. The camera cut out to show a white-haired man, likely in his late 60s, wringing his hands with the sleeves to his plaid shirt rolled halfway up to reveal hairy forearms. "Mr. Westford, can you tell us exactly what happened?" "Well, I was just doing some restocking, as I do every afternoon when the police showed up. I'm thinking, hell, Jimmy, what did Junior do now? You see, my son, he's been in trouble with the law a time or two." The reporter nodded impatiently, clearly trying to get him back on track. "So he tells me he's got a call about a burglar and asks me if I've seen anyone suspicious round here. I tell him I haven't since the last time I used the John and looked in the mirror." He paused for laughter but received only another stern look to continue. "Right. So we make a deal that he'll move his car around back and hide out in my office over by the slushy machine. I offered him a quart-sized wild cherry, but he turned me down. That's when I knew he meant business. We make our arrangements, and I go back to stocking the cigarettes. Couldn't keep my eyes off the door, though, and sure enough, within a couple of minutes, I see this feller power walking in. He hits the door, pulls down the black mask, and I knew it was on. I held my hands up and started our secret bird call so Officer Grady would know I was tagging him in." He paused as if warming up his throat. "Oh, I'm supposed to say he never agreed to me making this noise." "Gah! Gah!" He began the call, facing the camera as he did. It sounded like Danny DeVito's version of the Penguin. He coughed when he finished and continued the story. "Well, this confused the bejesus out of the robber. He held the damn gun right at my nose. It was so close I was going cross-eyed and getting dizzy from it. This is when Grady busted out of my office, his gun drawn. "Put it down," he yelled, just like on one of them cop shows. "The robber don't know what to do. He's spooked and he's not dropping the gun, just raised it at Grady. But he was close, remember? So I leaned forward and took a bite right out of his breadbasket. This got him real good, and he did drop the gun this time. Grady was on him like stink on... Well, you know. There's probably kids watching this, right? Anyway, Grady cuffed him, had him in the car when he came back, took me up on that offer for a wild cherry slushy. He drove off with his arm out the window like Dukes of Hazzard drinking my slushy. The reporter, dumbfounded, sent it back to Susan Lane at the news station. Carrie sat, also dumbfounded, and not at just the old man, but the news tip. It had to be from the paper. Or did it? He didn't know the situation. Maybe the robber's girlfriend heard his plan and decided to turn him in. Carrie doubted it. He called Angela again, got voicemail again, and then texted her. At some point later in the evening, he fell asleep on the couch, waking to the same loud Mitsubishi commercial from earlier. They just had to get rid of these outlanders. They were practically giving them away with $10,000 for any trade-in. Carrie clicked the TV off and saw it was 3 a.m. He was relieved to see he hadn't slept through their meeting. He knew he was done with sleep and decided to make a pot of coffee and see how much he could drink before he left the house. By his second cup, he was pacing the house like an old retired lady with nothing to do. Soon he'd be peeking out the blinds to see if the neighbors trimmed their hedges yet, or if he'd have to give a not-so-subtle hint the next time they walked to the mailbox. And that's just where he found himself. At the blinds, not the mailbox yet. He looked around. All was quiet, as it should be at 3 in the morning. His neighbor, Miss Lois's house, was dark. He figured she'd be taking the day shift of peering out the blinds. She was the first person to make a comment on his divorce. "I saw how she left the other day. She's not coming back, is she?" He shook his head, tucked his mail under his arm, and headed back to the house. She'd waited until he went to get the mail just to casually head to her mailbox at the same time. He thought maybe he'd get condolences or sympathy or maybe even cookies. But no, just that comment. He had half a mind to go throw an egg at her window or TP her yard. Or maybe both, he thought, staring at her window. He took a sip of coffee, then realized what the hell he was doing. He turned from her house and caught a glimpse of the car sitting between the water tower and the park across the street. It was dark and far off, but he couldn't take his eyes off of it. He realized his living room light was on, and whoever was in the car could probably see him watching them. He flipped off the light, then thought about how obvious that looked. Still, he peered out the window again, finding the car in the same place, but the engine had started. Carrie didn't think. He whipped open his front door and started up the driveway. The car peeled out of its place, throwing dirt as it turned onto the street, and fishtailed onto a patch of ice before driving out of sight. Carrie made it to the end of his driveway and saw nothing but the reflection of taillights far ahead. He ran back to his house and threw on his shoes and coat, grabbing his keys on his way out the door. Carrie knew he had no chance of tracking down the car, but he was more worried where it was headed. Carrie pulled into the church parking lot at 4:15. He could already see the paper wasn't in its normal spot, but he sprinted across the street anyway. He was on the yellow line when his foot caught some black ice and slipped out from under him. The pavement was solid on his back and smacked it hard. He tucked his chin enough to avoid a concussion, but still lay in the middle of the road, groaning. Thankfully, most people were at home in bed at this time of the morning. He took a moment to take in the stars and moon as he caught his breath. Carrie rolled the rest of the way to the graveyard entrance and slowly got to his feet. The damn paper was gone. He spun his head around, but kept his legs planted as if he was stuck in mud, afraid of slipping again. He knew Angela wouldn't be just standing there holding the paper defiantly. She'd be off saving lives or something. Carrie caught a laugh in his throat. Was he really jealous that she'd got to the psychic paper first and would be the one saving people today? Like superheroes fighting over who gets to pull the lady from the burning building? He should be happy someone was out there doing it, even if it wasn't him. But no, it was his discovery. His Graveyard Gazette, or nighttime news, or whatever. He'd found it first, showed it to her, and she didn't believe him. Then a worse thought came to mind. What if she wasn't doing anything with it? What if she was just taking it so he couldn't have it? But what about that crazy gas station owner? Had that really been someone else? He wouldn't know without asking her, and once again, he didn't know where to find her. The worst part was, he and his group had to work that coming night. They couldn't just stake it out all night. In retrospect, they should have done it this night. Why even leave it to chance that she could get to it first? It didn't matter now, as Carrie found himself shivering despite his warm jacket. Standing still in the icy weather as a cool breeze swept across the graveyard in front of him, he wondered when and if this place ever opened. He couldn't recall the gates ever being free of the big chain and lock wrapped around them. Could graveyards just go out of business? Carrie guessed once all the plots were full. It was totally possible. And here he was trying to prevent deaths. He was likely to put another graveyard out of business. The crunching of gravel and headlights brought him out of his thoughts. He turned almost too fast and had to catch himself, then saw a car slowing down. This is it, he thought. The police are finally here to get me. Despite the bright lights blinding him, it didn't look like a police cruiser. The car stopped a few feet from the entrance to the graveyard, and Carrie could hear a window roll down. "Can we talk?" came a voice. "What?" Carrie took a cautious step closer. "Angela? I'm ready to talk about this." She held the paper up. "Just promise not to freak out on me again." Carrie nodded. "I promise." Her window went up and she pulled into the church parking lot, leaving space between their cars. He met her, leaning awkwardly on his own car for moral support. "Are you stalking me now?" he asked as she emerged from her Honda. "It's not," she began. "It's not like that. I thought you were crazy, unstable, whatever. That morning, you really freaked me out. But I watched the news. I saw Marvin Lightfoot. It took me a couple days to get up the nerve, but I had to see it for myself. Make sure you just hadn't planted something. I don't know." "So, the crazy guy at the gas station?" said Carrie. Angela nodded. "Yeah, I called in the tip." Carrie looked down at the paper in her hand. It was out of the bag and she had it in a death grip. "What happened today, then?" "I thought maybe we should talk about it, but then I spooked when you saw me. You were stalking me, sitting outside my house in the middle of the night." Angela hung her head. "I know, but I don't do well with trust. I've got to watch from afar first. I've learned this. And after your display last time we were here, I didn't know if I'd be the next girl tied up in your basement that you eventually sawed to pieces." Carrie laughed a sick laugh at this. "Sawed to? You were in my house. If I was going to do anything, I know. I don't even have a basement." "Not the point." "Totally the point. I didn't try anything then. I wasn't trying anything that morning I met you here, and I'm not trying anything now." Her face shrunk, the cool breeze blowing her hair across chapped lips. "I know." Carrie sighed and pushed off his car. "So what made you come back today? You were gone with the paper. Why not just do whatever it is you've been doing?" Angela held out the paper and he stepped forward to meet her between their cars. "I need your help." When Johnny, Michelle, and Bruce arrived, Angela and Carrie stepped out of his car, much to the surprise of Carrie's friends. "Who's this?" Johnny approached them first. "This is Angela," said Carrie. Johnny eyed her up and down. "You a cop?" "What? Johnny?" Carrie shook his head. "Art teacher," said Angela. Johnny laughed. "Well, what the hell are you doing here?" Carrie looked at her, nodded, then back to Johnny. "She's our paper thief." "What?" said Bruce. "She's the one we were looking for yesterday?" "Yes," said Carrie, "but listen, Angela and I met a few days back. I tried to show her the paper to see if she could see what I was seeing." "Before you told us?" said Michelle. "Well, yeah, but—" "What, you don't trust us?" said Johnny. "No," Carrie held out his hands, trying to calm things down. "I was afraid you guys would think I'd lost my mind, and you know what? You kind of did think so. At least Bruce did." Bruce shrugged. "Fair enough. So listen, Angela is a friend. We've discussed none of us can go rogue and steal the paper before the others get here." "Who discussed?" asked Bruce. "Just you two?" "Just, we're the only ones that know about it, okay? Let's keep it that way." "We were," said Johnny, "till you told her." "I told her before I told you, remember?" Michelle stepped over to Carrie and Angela. "Listen, this was Carrie's discovery. He could tell who he wanted. We didn't believe him either. I think we all owe him an apology for that, but going forward, let's all agree, we don't tell anyone about this." "Deal," said Johnny. "Unless Carrie's told anyone else he forgot to mention." "I'm good." Carrie motioned to the woman he knew too much about in such the short time they'd been acquainted. "It's just Angela." "Well, good. Now listen, Carrie began. Today's newspaper has a tough assignment. Assignment, said Johnny. Good word for it. So what is it? Carrie held it out. There's a school bus going to slide off the road into Lake Catawba. Along 74? Michelle pointed at the picture of the school bus out in the icy water. Yep, said Carrie. But we don't know where. Just that it's going off the road, and 10 kids are going to die, along with the driver and another adult. 12 people? Bruce shook his head with wide eyes. We've got to do something. Johnny tapped the paper. We've got an hour. What are we thinking? Scouting out that stretch of road? How long is it? About 2 miles, said Angela. According to the map we looked at while we were waiting for you guys. We're thinking 2 cars, said Carrie. One at the beginning and one at the end. Once the bus passes one of the cars, they follow it and alert the other car. And what, said Johnny, we just follow them into the lake? I don't know, Carrie wrung his hands. We look for a sign, honk the horn, something. It's better than nothing, said Bruce. Let's do this. I'll drive one car. I'll drive the other, said Carrie. I'll come with you, Angela said to Carrie. I'll ride with Bruce, Michelle stepped over to him. Shotgun, said Johnny. In which car? Asked Bruce. Which lady are you going to make sit in the back? Lady, said Johnny. Bruce, you are setting me up and I am not taking the bait. Besides, I'm riding with you since you ain't got any ladies. Bitch, Michelle chased him to the passenger side of Bruce's Oldsmobile. See you there, said Carrie. See you there, said Bruce. I was going to stop here, but too much is happening, so we're going to do another chapter. Maybe a little longer than last week. Chapter 13. Highway 74 took longer to get to than they'd hoped. Other cars were in the ditch, blocking one path as a tow truck attempted to pull them out. By the time Carrie reached his end of the road, there was only a few minutes until the time in the paper. Your friends are interesting, said Angela. Never a dull moment, huh? He looked in the rearview mirror for any sign of a bus. Seems like it. She looked back at the empty road. Look, Carrie, I'm sorry for not believing you, okay? I'm not sure if I said that yet, but I mean it. I know how it is when everyone thinks you're lying, and you know deep down that you're not. It's terrible. Carrie let his eyes slip for a second to glance at the side of her face as she stared at her hand sitting in her lap. It's true, it's terrible, but we're good now, right? Yeah. And we're gonna work together. Yeah. Good. 'Cause I think I see a bus. The Danville Baptist Church bus came out of the dark and went flying by. Carrie stepped on the gas too strong and his tires spun in protest on the slick roads. Go, damn it, go! His hands gripped the wheel with white knuckles as his car took off and straightened out a bit after swerving. Grab my phone and call them. Angela did, and Michelle picked up. Bruce's whorehouse. The bus, Angela managed. On its way? Yes, but... Stay on the line, let us know. We'll be ready, but if it crashed down here, we don't want to miss it. Okay. Carrie was catching up, but keeping his distance, knowing his stopping range and the weather was going to make it tough, along with the darkness. Why the hell are you out right now with all those kids? Carrie asked the bus, feeling helpless to do anything. Retreat, said Angela. Was it a church bus? It was a church bus, not a school bus. Could be something they take the kids to. But the roads... I'm sure they prayed before they left. They were a mile and a half down the stretch of road that bordered Lake Catawba when Carrie could feel the fear creeping in. It would be any second now, and they couldn't do anything to stop it. Finally, he got an idea and laid on the horn, flashing his lights as he did. The bus slowed but continued on. Soon Carrie saw Bruce's headlights and feared the worst. If that were the spot they crashed, what if they hit Bruce instead? Damn it, move, Carrie yelled. That's where he's going in. What? Michelle called from the speakerphone. The bus, Carrie started, but it was too late. It reached Bruce's car. Michelle, Bruce, and Johnny held up their hands to shield their faces as the bright glow of the bus's headlights washed over them. Angela screamed as the back tires of the bus caught a dark patch of road, sliding left towards the shoulder the Oldsmobile sat on. And then it passed. The church bus continued down 74 as Carrie pulled over on the shoulder across from Bruce's car. A cloud of dirt swarmed up as he looked across the road to Bruce, Johnny, and Michelle. laughing and patting each other on the shoulder as he and Angela could listen in on the speakerphone. God damn, I thought it was the end. Bruce opened his window and waved to them with a big smile. Mother, Carrie shook his head. So we did it? Asked Angela. Think we did, said Johnny. Fuck me, we just saved 12 little kids. And then they heard a horrible screeching back down the road from where Carrie had come from. It was followed by a thumping and crashing noises coming from the darkness. Carrie looked to Bruce, whose smile had faded to shock. Go, yelled Carrie. I'm right behind you. Bruce peeled out, much the way Carrie had a few minutes earlier, and slowly gained traction, disappearing as Carrie spun his car around to follow. It was less than a quarter mile when they spotted the bus sinking into the lake, half submerged already. There's the bus, said Michelle, then louder, pointing forward. Deer! Bruce saw it at the last second, a large doe laying in the road. He turned his wheel and slid up to it, stopping as it slammed the bottom of the driver's side door. Jesus, Johnny thumped around in the back seat. Carrie hit his brakes and caught enough clear pavement to stop a car length short of Bruce. After a few seconds, they both pulled to the side of the road, ignoring the deer and guts on Bruce's door. Angela called for an ambulance as the others jumped out, running to the shore to see the horrible sight of kids, no more than 10 or 12, swimming for their lives in the icy water. The bus had plowed through the thin layer of ice on top, and it floated like glass shards around the kids, who made it out the front door. Michelle, Johnny, and Carrie rushed to help pull the kids from the lake when they saw the others, trapped at the back of the bus. They were slamming their hands on the window with luggage piled up, blocking their way out. Bruce ran back to his car, popped the trunk, and came around, wielding a tire iron. He ran into the water like a kid on summer vacation trying to catch a wave, but then jumped onto the bumper. His weight didn't help the sinking bus, but soon he was cracking the windshield with strikes from his tire iron. Michelle joined on the bumper, reaching for the latch. Together they ripped the door open. The rest of the group ran into the waist-deep water and started pulling out piles of luggage, tossing it into the water as they did. Bruce reached a long arm over the pile and caught a kid's hand, yanking him over and into Carrie and Angela's arms. They helped him to the shore and went back for the next. Michelle pulled another kid out, then Bruce. Carrie and Angela led them back to the shore as water poured through the back door. The bus was sinking further, causing an undertow that was sucking the group with it. Michelle peered in the water-filled bus. Her eyes went wide with what she saw. Bruce saw the look on her face and grabbed the back of her shirt. No, he said, we've got to go. But, she started. Then Bruce leaned in and took one last long swipe through the dark water. His hand caught a floating arm and he gripped it tight. Pull us in, yelled Bruce. Michelle helped him out of the back door and they jumped off the bumper, Bruce with one last child under his arm. Johnny was the closest to the shore, latching arms with Angela, then she with Carrie, and Carrie with Michelle. Michelle hooked onto Bruce just as he lost his footing in the sinking bus, pulling him and the child in. He slid over an edge on the lake bottom. The girl in his grip went under, and her red hair floated around her. Help us, Johnny yelled to the group of shivering kids on the shore. They ran up and braced him, pulling back on him and Angela, then helping to reel in the rest of the human chain as Johnny gained more ground. Soon, Bruce and the girl were above water again. They made it to the shore as the bus topped off with freezing water and chunks of ice. Everyone was shivering hard on the shore, the kids watching the bus, holding each other, while Carrie's group tried to figure out the next steps. Bruce dug in his pocket with a shaking hand. Someone start my car. He tossed the keys towards Johnny and missed as they clanged onto the pavement. Turn the heat up. Right. Johnny ran to it. How long until the ambulance? Asked Michelle. Angela shrugged, looking up the road. I don't know. I called them and told them where we were, but the kids... Michelle nodded. Carrie ran to start his own car, cranking the heat as well. He came back, waved them on to get in his car, but the kids only stared at the lake. Shit, said Carrie to Johnny under his breath. We couldn't get 'em all. Johnny watched the bus sink. We ain't superheroes after all. The kids broke out of it when Bruce yelled, Get in the cars! As he carried the red-headed girl up the hill. Michelle and Angela helped herd the children to their cars. There were 9 altogether. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later, then a police car. Bruce was in his car holding the girl in his lap, fighting to keep her awake. They crammed 4 more kids in the back and 2 in the front of his big Oldsmobile. Carrie's car held the rest as he was begging the heater to pump out all it had. The kids had stripped off their wet clothes and to help warm themselves up quicker, according to one of the Boy Scouts in the group. They were all checked by the paramedics, wrapped in blankets, and most of them treated for hypothermia, mild and severe. They'd saved 9 kids that morning. There were 3 more kids, a bus driver, and adult chaperone left in the lake. They'd been heading to a winter youth retreat in Charlotte. Their other bus, which held even more kids, was halfway there before they received the call with the news. Bruce had a brief stop at the hospital but was released by lunchtime. The group agreed to spend the day resting, recovering, and then to meet up for some well-deserved dinner and drinks. Johnny tipped back a beer at Dugan's pub. "They already called you?" Bruce smiled and held up his own beer. "Sure thing. The reporters want to get in for an exclusive while I was still at the hospital bed. I kid you not, I saw one of my nurses shaking a catheter at that blonde lady from Channel 13. The group laughed. They filled up a circular booth at the back of the pub. Carrie, Johnny, Bruce, Michelle, and their new addition, Angela. "All I got was a pitcher and a couple of questions," said Johnny. "I hope they got my good side." "Not sure you," started Michelle. "Shut it," said Johnny. "Too easy." "It's kind of a blur to me now," said Carrie. "I don't even remember what I said." Then he whispered, "Nobody mentioned the paper, right?" "Scout's honor." Johnny raised his beer. Michelle met it with a clink from her own. "Good." Angela's beer sat untouched, twisting some hair around a finger. "Isn't anyone afraid of the attention?" "How so?" asked Bruce. "The paper. What if somebody finds out?" "We've just got to be careful," said Carrie. "Watch what we say." "All right, buzzkills," said Johnny. "Can we just be proud of what we did today?" "We can," Bruce started, "but I don't think I'll ever forget those bodies." Michelle put a hand on his arm. "I'm with ya. If we would have if that other bus hadn't..." "Yeah," said Carrie. "It threw us off. The paper didn't say anything about the 2 buses. We should have brought another car and then, well, I don't know. Maybe things would have been different." "Listen now," Johnny smacked the table. "There are 7 more kids alive today than would have been without us. You read the damn thing. 12 kids, 2 adults. Only 2 survived. Last I checked, we had 9 kids in your cars." "I'm actually impressed by your math," said Michelle, "but you're right. This thing doesn't leave room for ifs, only if we can do with what we can do with the information we have." "Agreed," said Carrie. Angela nodded, raising her glass. "To the 7, then?" "To the 7," everyone agreed. They were finishing their meal, and Johnny had his wallet in hand as the waiter came over. "We're ready for the check when you are," Johnny said. The waiter stacked a couple of their dirty plates on his forearm. "The owner says it'll be on the house. He's got the news on in his office, and you're all on it. Pretty awesome what you guys did." "Hey, thanks." Johnny tucked his wallet back in his pocket. "Just doing our duty." "He'd like to thank you himself." As he spoke, a burly man with a red beard walked up. "Fellas and ladies, I'm Jim Dugan. I own this place. You don't know this, but my niece was on that bus." They could see his face turning red. "My sister called me earlier from the hospital. I went by, and Emma was awake, doing well. Said a big old black angel swooped down and saved her." He looked at Bruce, and wordlessly Bruce stood up, stuck out his hand, but the owner leaned in and hugged him. The big red beard tucked into Bruce's neck as he squeezed the man back. After a few seconds, the men broke the hug, and then Jim did shake his hand. "Would have killed my sister to lose Emma, you know. I'm sorry all I can do for you here is a meal right now, but you're welcome here anytime." Then he looked around the table. "That goes for all of you." The group thanked him, and he stepped away, wiping his eyes. "Damn," Johnny said to Bruce. "They're going to probably name a meal after you here now, too." Bruce just laughed as they headed for the exit. That's the end for this week. That was intense. We'll see you next week.